of activity, or by the time one lands up on the activity plane, half of the freedom is already lost. Half of the freedom is already lost. So in the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna voices out this particular observation. And Arjuna is asking Lord Krishna that when we go to act, we are not free to act. We realize and we see that there are impelling forces. There are forces which are impelling us to behave, especially negative forces, impelling us to behave towards sinful activities. So we are not free, because people, we get forced, people get forced to, as if they get forced to sin. They get impelled towards sinful activity. So what is this impelling force? Arjuna speaks this out. So now if on the activity plane we don't have full freedom, where do we have full freedom? That's where we have to go to, or we have to understand and realize that the activity plane is an intermediate plane. Activity is not causal. Activity is not causal. So activity, in simple terms to say, is like the hardware manifestation. So what causes the activity are planes whose granularity is more subtle, and therefore the power and that plane is so that is a subtle plane. And so the subtle plane, that is a plane of the mind, the plane of the thought. So now we may say, yes, it is a living entity who chooses or desires to act. I mean, there may be limited choices which is given to a person. One particular choice may be easier, one particular choice may be difficult, but more or less there is some amount of choice which we can see is there with a living entity. So even if one is impelled to sin, still one can find that there is some feeble option in the head. There is some feeble option in the head which speaks about, or which says, okay, act in a positive way, is it not? So we can understand that yes, and we do understand that the desire is coming from the platform of the soul. It is the soul who desires. But to understand the desire and choice on the platform of the soul, we have to go, the activity plane is too gross. So we have to go one level up, one level more subtle on the subtle body. That is on the level of mind and intelligence. That's where we understand that let's try to zoom, or focus, the tune the focal settings to the plane of the thought. It is at the level of thought. It is at the level of thought where one can exercise freedom, because thought is the cause for the activity. Thought is the cause of the activity. Thought is the cause of the activity. So thought is the cause of the activity. Now how thoughts, in fact we will see that thoughts are like a diet. For the mind and intelligence, thoughts are like a diet. Positive thoughts are like a diet. So yes, so therefore you will see positive thoughts, negative thoughts, both have a lasting or a cascading effect. You will see when we feed ourselves with positive thoughts, uh, one's mental immunity increases, one's strength to tolerate provoking situations increases, one's fixity, absorption, and meditation and positivity increases. Now, one is able to live by or adhere to values and principles. If one feeds himself properly, then he is healthy, he has some strength. Now, if one feeds himself negatively, then what is the case? So, if one feeds himself negatively, then addictions increase, is it not? Addictions. And it leads to negative traits and negative habits, which ultimately leads to a person's downfall and destruction. So, in this way, we can understand that thoughts are like a food. So, if we feed in positive external thoughts, that that external positive feed uh, gets amplified by the mechanism of the mind and the intelligence. And when that through remissing, through musing over, through mananam in Hindi it is called as. So by that, what is happening is that the positive thoughts are getting amplified, or you can say the positive thoughts are getting channelized within the system. And because of that, what is happening is there are a lot of positive changes in a person's behavior. Whereas negative thoughts also have this kind of an effect, and the term we use to describe that is addictive. The negative thoughts are also addictive. Why? Because negative thoughts also trigger a fission fusion and a chain reaction, and that chain reaction continues till the time the negativity goes on increasing, and it manifests into self-destructive traits, negative behavior patterns, and so on. So thoughts. So the interesting point to observe is that interesting point to observe is that or the interesting point we want to probe into today, which we want to probe into today's session, is how thoughts relate with our body functioning. So we understand that our body functions basically because of the various organs, and now the various organs are working in a systematic coordination actually, and there is wear and tear going on, there is supply going on, there is immune system going on. Uh, so all that is going on now. Uh, in the body. Now, if we talk about body is quite physical. Our body is quite physical, and we understand. Okay, now through our understanding of now science, or our own body, we can understand that actually body, the way the body behaves. Uh, I mean, what is going to be the anatomical manifestation of the body? How is it going to grow? Which organs are healthy? Which are diseased? How the trajectory of the body growth and the body maintenance and the body's wear and tear will be is very much described in is very much I mean is quite prominently described in genetic codes. So we understand that okay, genes are like programming codes. And these codes give us a lot of valuable information about uh, uh, so I mean uh, okay, technically speaking, genes are not like programming codes. The genes express programming codes. Actually, the structure of the genes uh, can be can be written in the form of programming codes, and these codes very much talk about, okay, what type of what type of trajectories the body's evolution, I mean the body's journey of growth and maintenance is going to take. So in that way, now if you talk about body, the subtle aspect of how the body is functioning, gee, something to uh, I mean the body is no, the subtle dimension or the subtle plane from which the body functioning or the body's growth and maintenance trajectory is taking place, that has something to give and take with genes. And now the interesting and amazing revelation what we are going to probe into is, how do thoughts relate with genes? So how do thought relate with genes? Our genes, and also yes, I mean, so when we talk about genes, uh, so the genetic code is expressed in chromosomes, and then uh, I mean, it's manifest in chromosomes, and it basically means DNA and RNA. And when we talk about DNA and RNA, then we are talking about uh, proteins, and proteins, and then proteins are made up of amino acids, and there are 70,000 to 90,000 different types of amino and acids. That's the story which we are talking about. So that's quite gross and material. So the interesting point to be able to no, so now the whole point is that now, how do we engineer? When we talk about genes, how do we engineer that? And how can we come out of these impelling forces and exercise that freedom? And how do we save ourselves from landing into these addictive, self-destructive trajectories? That's what we want to understand. And therefore the question which we want to understand is that, so now when we talk about this, we may say, okay, externally we are talking about biology. So the question is now, what controls biology? And that's where the genetic secrets are going to lie. What controls biology? And uh, uh, that will be the focal point of today's discussion. So now we will see that our body is very much like a circuitry. So there are these so our body is very much like, now if you will see, it's like a template circuitry. It's not like a full-fledged circuitry, but it's like a template circuitry. Just like in an electronics experiment, you will see that there is in an electronics experiment, you will find a breadboard. So when all the electronics experiments are performed on a breadboard, so now in a breadboard we can see in a breadboard now in a breadboard we can see that there are these parallel, I mean there are these horizontal and vertical lines on perpendicular, but these lines do not complete the circuitry. It's a template. So what completes the circuitry is uh, it's a template. So now what completes the circuitry is when we so there are these holes in the breadboard, and when we actually plug in any component, whether we plug in an IC or a resistor or a capacitor, or we ground, or we plug in a battery point, so whenever we plug in, that makes the circuitry complete. So there are these parallel perpendicular connections, which is like a template. And when we place any particular electrical component, and the hole gets filled up, then the circuitry becomes complete. And when the hole is filled up, the circuitry is complete, the current starts flowing in the circuitry. I mean, that's how the electronics experiments are designed. So we will see that actually, our body stores these kind of template circuitries. Template circuitries. That means it is the prototypes or templates which get stored in our body. So yes, mind stores these in the form of impressions. The body stores these in the form of genes. So it's similar. It's similar. It is just a subtle plane manifestation and the gross plane manifestation. The body stores these templates in the form of no, we call it as sanskars. We call it as sanskars, or the negative sanskars are also called as vasanas. So they are stored in the mind. Similarly, in the body, in the gross way, what is stored is uh, in the gross way, what is stored is oh, okay, okay. So in the gross way, what is stored is the genes. So now, having understood this, now what we need to understand is what having understood this, the next point what we need to understand is uh, yeah. So having understood this, what we need to understand is that, so now in this breadboard, the filling of the holes is done by thoughts. So a thought is a very tangible entity. One may say, okay, I'm just thinking. Even if I am thinking negative, I have not done anything wrong, so why should I be penalized? A thought is not that cheap. A thought is a very tangible entity, because if you think long enough, a little longer, if you think long enough, a little deep enough, the thought will compel. So the thought will become a compelling. No, the thought will compel the person to act. So the thought, no, on its own condenses, takes a compelling form and compels the person, instigates him towards action. So one may say, no, I just little bit think and move out. If a little bit think and move out, there is a little bit permanent proclivity towards that particular action. So little after some time, what is going to happen? A person will get provocation to perform the activity which the thought is dictating in a compelling fashion, in a irresistible fashion. So thought is quite tangible. So that means the thought is filling the breadboard. So therefore, when we are talking about what is controlling biology, it's not just so now comes the important aspect, actually, that there are templates. There is this breadboard circuitry in the gross body in the form of genes. There is a breadboard circuitry in the subtle body in the form of vasanas, but still there are some holes which are left for us. And if we fill those holes properly, then what is going to happen? Proper circuitry is going to happen, positive current will flow. But if you fill those holes negatively, then sparks may happen and circuit breakdown may happen, and so on. So therefore, it is the it is the environment. Now thoughts are existing in the environment. It is the environment which is actually controlling the entire circuitry. So now, yes, I mean, there is the external environment and there is the internal environment. External environment is, gives a stimulus, offers a stimulus that stimulates the internal environment. When the internal environment is stimulated, then then what is going to happen is the internal environment is stimulated. Then certain internal mental algorithms are stimulated. So, but mental algorithms only provoke. The soul decides. But if the soul does not have any positive value system, any positive shelter to take, then the soul gets pulled towards the pull of the vasanas, and that's how by default the soul chooses the wrong kind of thoughts. And then when he chooses the wrong kind of thought, that fills the hole, and the wrong circuitry is completed. So now the point comes is that, but if one has positive algorithms, if one has taken a good intake of positive mental food or positive intelligence diet, which is what happens when we read Shastras, which is what happens when we connect to God, then what happens is then even though the external environment has triggered a negative external environment has triggered a negative internal algorithm. So even in the face of that provocation, if a person has fed himself with good spiritual diet, then then the diet goes and soothes or strengthens the mind and intelligence in such a way that this negative provocation is also digested, is digested in such a way that the whole which is filled up is a positive thought. So here we can understand that yes, we can tune the way we think. How do we tune the way we think? If we feed ourselves with positive thoughts, it is what we are going to think about. So whatever is the food we take in, that is what we will remiss, or that is what we will munch on. So, like say for example, if one is feeding himself with watching say horror movies, then by default a person will be very fearful. He'll be very fearful. Any external stimulus, no, any no, as soon as the evening comes, he becomes very fearful. Why? Because he has fed himself with negativity. Similarly, if a person feeds himself with God consciousness, with the message given in the scriptures, then that will always lead to positive feelings. Positive feelings. So that's how we can understand. Uh, so this in the first place, this is what we are understanding in the first place, that thoughts have an excessive thoughts have a great amount of importance. So therefore better have positive food given by the Shastras, the glories of the Lord, the pastimes of the Lord, the activities of the Lord. So that positive thoughts, when they go in and we are feeding that our external, then we have a good stock. When we are not no, so the time when we are not eating, there is a good stock inside, then one will be doing mananam on that. So then the mind starts getting absorbed in spiritual thoughts and positive thoughts. Then we will see the holes are filled with positive thoughts. That is where one can maintain positive thoughts. So the interesting part of the story is that now we are talking about a mental plane and we are talking about a subtle plane, the gross plane or the subtle plane. We're talking about the mental plane, we are talking about the subtle plane. In the subtle plane, there are vasanas and proclivities. We may call them as habits or character traits. Uh, on the gross plane, there are the genes. So the interesting aspect is that the thoughts have a greater power over the physical manifestation of the body. That means that positive thoughts, positive beliefs, value systems, can manifest in the form of changes in our genes. Not only positive thoughts can manifest in the form of changes in our genes, positive thoughts can also manifest in the form of controlling our genes and channelizing the expression of the genes. And therefore, we will see just from engineering thoughts, we can actually engineer and manipulate our genes. You know, casting aside the negative ones and amplifying uh, the positive ones. Positive ones. So that's why it is the beliefs and thoughts which select our genes and behavior. Genes and behavior. Now we may say, okay, but how does it happen? What is the modus operandi? So in simple words, if you want to, in short, if you want to understand the modus operandi, quite easily we can understand the modus operandi. I mean, to just touch upon it in a nutshell, and then we will expand it. So to touch upon it in a nutshell, we can understand that. Uh, so basically, the thoughts, when thoughts resonate, or you can say that thoughts, positive or negative, whichever thoughts are resonating inside our system, inside our body, those thoughts lead to the manifestation of different kinds of enzymes. Is it not? A person is angry, adrenaline is secreted. A person is happy, then no, what is that? Endorphin is secreted. Is it not? Uh, so now the point comes here that so these enzymes basically now because of now these enzymes have different shapes, they have different structures, and these structures, because these enzymes are different shape and different structures, we will see that now because of having a different shape and different structures, they basically kickstart, they basically kickstart, or they basically actually fit and fix and activate certain kind of templates. So we will see therefore in our body there are both kinds of genes. Now this is very much this is very much seen from a biological perspective or a diagnosis perspective, that every person has both kinds of genes. So there are positive genes produces which gives imparts health, and negative genes maybe which actually triggers a certain kind of disease, maybe say cancer or something like that. So now different enzymes which are secreted, they kickstart and activate different gene mechanisms, which is what we were saying was like circuitry templates. So they activate different gene mechanisms, positive or negative. And in this way, we will see that actually thoughts are governing or controlling the activity of the genes. Let's go forward. So to understand this aspect more about how thoughts reflect in a biological framework where we are uh, where everything is there in the form of proteins, in that protein world actually. If you want to understand that, let's understand the working of the cell, and let's compare that with the working of a human being. We will see when it comes to human being, the command center of the human body is the brain. Now, if you want to understand, okay, what is the command center of a cell, which is the, or in simple words to say, okay, what is the brain of the cell? What is the brain of the cell? So, if you want to understand that, one may say, okay, probably an nucleus is the command center of the cell. Let's try to probe deeper. Yeah. So So if the brain is removed, we see immediately the person is dead. But then biologists have done this interesting experiment which shows that if the nucleus is removed, the cell doesn't die. Rather, the cell is alive for 2 to 3 months. So this is uh, astounding. Why? Because if the nucleus is the brain, then how can a cell survive without the nucleus? You know, that means that the nucleus is not storing the mechanisms and templates about the functioning of the cell. The nucleus is storing something else. Let's try to go further. Yeah. Okay. So now we are coming to a very interesting now turn. That now the question or the turn here is that uh, the turn here is that uh, the nucleus. We know nucleus is made up of chromosomes, and chromosomes are made up of basically genes. The genetic codes are present there, DNA, RNA, everything. Nucleus is the hub of that. So now we are coming to the point to question that is genes controlling everything? Is genes controlling everything? What is the now? So where lies the controlling power? How much is the controlling power in the genes? And are genes the glacier point of control, or genes are the intermediary point of control? This is the interesting observation now we are coming to actually. So this is a question which has been haunting scientists from decades and decades and decades. Till in the late so in the late 1980s, 1990s, that quest or that question, that inquisitiveness had become so strong that that actually scientists came together, formed communities, formed collaborations, formed and then they wanted to understand how much can genes explain. The fantastic idea was that if genes are having the code for everything in the human body, now for the making of, for the sustenance of, for the regeneration of every organ. So if we know all the genes of the human body, then actually we can create a human being, because we get the genetic code. So we can create a human being. And this is the lofty aspiration which this is the basic lofty aspiration which led to the uh, this is the lofty aspiration which led to the beginning of which led to the beginning of the Human Genome Project, what it is called as. This project had hundreds of scientists working from all around the world in 2 different teams, and they worked for more than a decade to be able to find the codes or the genetic expressions of all the various kinds of genes. Now, in a human body, there are around 1,20,000 genes actually. So, if genes were to, so that means that if genes were to control everything, then what we need is basically in our whole life is 1,20,000 genes. 1,20,000 genes is what we need. Now, so the Human Genome project led to 2 publications, one in Nature and one in Science, by 2 different teams of professors and scientists and researchers. So both happened in the early 2001. Both the publications happened in the early 2001, and so the publication in Nature explained that okay, they could understand and they could crack around, or they could find 30,000 genes, 30 to 40,000 genes in the human body. And whereas the publication in Science reported finding around 27,000 genes. 27,000 genes. So this was a shock for the research community, because the whole point was that there we need 120,000 genes actually to control everything in our body. But then The 1,20,000 genes are not present in the body. Only 30 to 40,000 genes at max, which is what the research showed. So very shocking. This was very shocking. That means that all the templates we need for our life actually are not present, are not present, are not from the time of birth, are not present at any given point of time. So at any given point of time, what is present is something, but then the majority of it, the 2/3 of it is missing, and the 2/3 of it now speaks about, now the 2/3 of it points out a very important a very important lesson. 2/3 of the genes are missing. This points out that our activity and behavior, our destiny is not hard coded. Is not hard coded. There are some rewards, positive or negative, which we are carrying because of our previous activities in the form of inherited genes, or in the form of the genes which are present at the time of the birth. But then the other genes, the 2/3 part, is the freedom what we have. That means that during the lifespan of a person, the genes, new and new genes are created. And what kind of gene will be created very much depends upon what kind of thoughts, beliefs, value systems one has in one's life. Value systems what one has in one life. Okay, from here the slideshow is going. Okay, the video from here is stopped. Okay, so the slideshow is going. Okay. It is a slideshow which is going, right? Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so let's try to see or delve into this a little deeper. We can see that, okay, cells carry out the same functions as human beings. So human beings eat, actually, cells are also eating. Human beings commit suicide. The cells also commit suicide. So that's why understanding of the behavior of human beings little bit gives us pointers to understand actually what's happening at the cellular level in terms of clarifying the roles of various parts and organs actually. And that's what will help us in better understanding, or that's what helps us in better understanding uh, how the thoughts relate to, or how the thoughts uh, affect the genes. So thoughts are going to affect genes in two ways. Thoughts are going to affect genes in two ways, and we are going to see that. The first, in terms of controlling, and dictating, or not controlling but dictating what kind of new genes are going to be created, and the second in terms of actually controlling the pre-existing genes. Now whether they should get manifested, not manifested, what should happen. So let us see, cells are like machines which are made of protein parts, having around 70,000 to 90,000 amino acids. Proteins are beaded strings actually, where each bead being an amino acid. Now, now we know amino acids actually in DNA. We have four types of amino acids, which is A, G, C, T. I mean, we code them. So, uh, and in RNA again we have four types, which is A, G, C, U instead of T. Instead of thymine, it is U. So. Uh, so So that's how the shape of the amino acids can be sequenced, and that sequence actually tells us about the shape of the protein. Actually, so we will write A, G, C, T, T, C, C, D, G. So that's how the code is given. And if you give a coding to it, I mean a binary coding to it, and the A is given a coding 00, G is given 01. Anyway, C is given a 10 and a T given a 11, then you can have a binary coding actually, and that's what we call it as genetic sequencing or DNA sequencing. So now the shape of the amino acids is written down in a sequence, and that's what determines the shape of the protein. Okay, there are some. Okay, so so now we are seeing actually the nucleus is made up of these chromosomes and genetic material, and basically this genetic material is basically a blueprint for generating various kinds of proteins. That means that the nucleus, what it is doing is uh, that means the nucleus, what it does is very much the aspect of generation, the generation of various kinds of proteins, the generation of various kinds of proteins. Don't mind the visual effects, because they are not my control. so, 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 thank God the speech is my control. so, uh, so actually, so what is not in our control, we don't have to get too much worried about that. We want to understand what is in our control, because that what is in our control, that is what we can unleash, to bring about a whole meaningful and auspicious destiny for ourselves. And what is not in our control, uh, there is no point banging our head on that. So so in this way, we can understand that the nucleus is very much related to the generation of things. And now scientists talk about that which controls the day-to-day mechanisms when it comes to a cell is not the nucleus, because the nucleus is taking care of the generation, but the control is taking place from the membrane, the cell membrane. It is the cell membrane which is full of antennas, and it is a cell membrane actually which interfaces a particular signal or any object, and processes it, passes it, or does some activity. It is a membrane which is full of these antennas, and all these antennas are tuned in a physical format. I mean, it's a physical, mechanism. I mean, it's a physical mechanism which is working out. So one particular enzyme actually comes to the membrane antenna, activates an antenna, now which gets, so the antenna is tuned to that particular component, and when that enzyme comes in, it activates the antenna. The antenna gets activated, sends signals, and starts doing the activity. Now these signals actually, or this activity, is what is experienced by the nucleus, that is the genetic material, and based on that based on that reception of the activity of the signal which the antenna and the membrane has given, what happens is the particular genes, a particular prototype genes gets activated, and then particular kind of proteins are formed, and uh, and yes, these and therefore certain particular kinds of genes, new genes are created. So in this way, we can understand it is the environment, the mental environment. What kind of thoughts we have is what is triggering. A particular antenna in the cell membrane is what signals. The nucleus is what activates the particular prototype genes, and therefore that reflects in different kinds of proteins being created, and those the specific kinds of proteins which are created result in the formation of the new genes, which is what we saw before, that we only have 27, 30,000 genes which are fixed, and the other genes are going to be reduced in the course of one's life based on the environment. So this environment is basically the mental thought. It's basically the inner environment, the mental environment. And actually, this has been seen also in dermatology. Dermatology, they talk about that this ectoderm actually in an embryo, in embryology, that is what produces the skin and the brain of the embryo. It's the same. It's the same art. Go further. So nucleus is like the blueprint. So therefore, it's more like a reproductive unit, but it is the genes. So this is what was a result which was actually brought about by Niche Boyer in 1990. It says that when a gene product is needed, when a particular new gene is needed, a signal from the environment, not an emergent property of the gene itself, activates the expression of the gene. So when any particular new genes is needed, it is a signal from the environment, which actually completes the circuitry, and which is and because of that, the new particular kind of gene is created. It is not an emergent property of the existing genes. It is a signal from the environment. And because it is a signal from the environment, now, therefore, we have the chance to do engineering. Now, think about it actually. Bhagavad Gita is teaching us the formulas for genetic engineering. Just not. Engineer your own genes. What has been fixed is only 27 to 30,000. Now, the remaining 90,000 is in your hands. It's in your hands, actually. But what kind of mental environment we create? Now, that mental environment is decided by what kind of food intake we take on the mental plane, what kind of thoughts, what kind of value systems, what kind of beliefs, what kind of interpretation mechanisms, what we have. That is what is going to do this whole amazing genetic engineering. So our Shastras teach us everything, including genetic engineering. Yeah. So this is just an example to show that just like we can make a robot, and when this robot touches an object, it gets a physical sensation, then the robot can send a signal that it has touched, or it touches the object, it can lift it. When it gets the object in hand, the robot can lift it actually. It is very much possible to design this on from a mechanical engineering or a mechanical design perspective. The same way, actually, physical sensations of touch, can be, are actually designed in our systems. Actually, so we were talking that okay, when a particular enzyme comes, that particular shape of the enzyme fits. That particular shape of the enzyme fits. Uh, into a particular antenna which is looking out for that particular shape, and when that fit happens, it's like when this robo is coming in touch with the object, it's very much possible to design a robo that it picks it up, is it not, or grabs it, is it not? So similarly, actually, when that enzyme sits on the antenna, then the antenna can send the activation signal that okay, now this particular enzyme has come, particular shape has come actually, and therefore the resulting signal can be processed or triggered, and that is received by the existing set of genes and forms the template for new gene creation. So it's quite a mechanical system, happening in the body. So, and in this way, we will see that the plane of the thought and the plane of the gross body, which is matter, the material body, gets interrelated. Actually, it's interrelated. Therefore, value systems are very important. Value systems are very important. So people may say, okay, it's not just about value systems are very important. So this gives us an amazing dimension into even physical health. People feel that okay, or people in general feeling is that okay, if you want to be healthy, then you need to do exercises. You need the physical exercises. The body is functioning, and the body will not get jammed and things like that. And a good diet, natural food products like fruits, that'll keep the body healthy. But here we are learning the new dimension, actually the third dimension, which can control physical health, biology, and that is actually thoughts, positive thoughts. Yeah. Now we will see the second type of control which can be brought about by thoughts. The second type of control, and for that we need to delve into the composition of chromosomes. So chromosomes are made up of 50% of DNA, and that means what? The other 50% is proteins. Basically, uh, so now here we are seeing actually uh, uh, RNA is very much like a template. Uh, It's a template of gene production actually. So RNA is very much a template actually, and therefore you will see RNAs are not inherited, DNAs are inherited actually, and yes, actually protein is a building block, but protein is not just a building block. Protein is a channelizer also. How protein is a channelizer? Actually, the genes, the chromosomes actually. Chromosomes exist. Chromosomes are encapsulated into bags of proteins. And that's how they exist. They are encapsulated in bags of proteins. Now, uh, uh, so when a chromosome is encapsulated in a bag of protein, then it is in a deactivated state. So it's in a deactivated state. The genes, when they are not covered over by proteins, then they are deactivated actually. So, so they are deactivated. So now a particular environment signal comes and mingles or fits into mixes. I mean, not fits. I mean, it gets not absorbed but adsorbed. So it fixes into. And it's a mechanical. It's a mechanical design. It fits or fixes into a regulatory protein because of its fitting. A certain type of motion is triggered, a certain type of action is triggered, I know that's what we're talking about is the regulatory protein. Because of the regulatory protein, actually, the encapsulation may unveil or unwind. When the encapsulation gets unwound, the particular gene becomes activated. Encapsulated gene becomes activated. When it becomes activated, it will create further protein. Will create further protein. So, in this way, we are understanding a very interesting phenomenon. The phenomena is that a particular environment signal basically uh, can cause a particular gene, a deactivated gene to open up. Now, researchers found out that actually that many times researchers found out that there are many negative genes in the body. Just like say the gene producing cancer cells. So now this gene may be lying inside a person's body, but it doesn't get activated for many years. Only at a certain point it gets activated. So there have been cases where the person has got cancer, very deadly cancer sort of a thing, and but then it is found that it had been found out that the genes is already there. The cancer producing genes is already there in his body, but it only got activated say at age 50 or so. So till that time the gene was not activated. The person was living healthy, like that. So we need to understand that it was a certain environment signal which activated that gene, or which caused the encapsulation to actually open up. The researchers found out that when a person embarks upon or harps upon negative thoughts, negative thinking, oh, angry, is depressive thoughts, distressing thoughts, negative thoughts, envious thoughts, you know. So these negative thoughts actually open up the negative genes. Open up the negative genes. So this is quite instructive and interesting. Why? Because suppose a person has a gene which produces cancer cells. Now the gene is encapsulated. If a person surrounds himself with positive thoughts all his life, that cancer-producing gene will never open up, and therefore a person can live healthily throughout his life. Although he has the cancer-producing gene in his own body, still he can live a very healthy life. So this is another interesting dimension of genetic engineering. So even though in 27,000 or 30,000, one is having negative genes, one can keep all those genes nicely closed by surrounding oneself with positive thoughts. And the best way to surround it with oneself with positive thoughts is to die full on. Is to die full on uh, in spiritual life. In the oceanic depths of spiritual life, actually, one will see that one is completely drowned and submerged. Positive thoughts of warmth, of love. And when that is the case, then any of these negative genes may never open up. Any of these negative genes may never open up. So therefore, it's not very much, it's not very much proper to put the blame of everything on God. That everything has this is the destiny that is there in the destiny. So first of all, destiny is our own purchase. So the 27-30,000 genes which are there are all because of karma actually. That means our previous bad activities, and we have got the sinful reaction of that in the form of genes. So, and those 27-30 are there. But still the Lord is giving us the freedom that we can surround ourselves with positive thoughts, the negative genes do not open up. Therefore, even those 27-30,000, one can actually control and manipulate and maneuver simply by the proper thought engineering, uh, simply by systematic but deep and intense spiritual life. Spiritual life. So we adjust our genes to fit to the environment we live in. It is the environment, uh, the genes fit to the environment we live in. So it is the environment which shapes our genetic code. And yeah, so technically the mechanism is explained. So the environment actually is processed by you see the environment is processed by the organisms of perception of environment. This perception of environment leads to basically production of enzymes or and those enzymes actually go uh, uh, and activate the genes of DNA metabolism. That means what is going to be activated, what is not going to be activated, how the no, and that also goes into phenotypic variations actually, which are not inherited, which is what creates the variations. Uh, which is what phenotypic variation. And it is the environment which also signals. It is the environment which also signals actually the genotypic variation. Uh, so that means which type of template has to be activated, which is not to be activated. That way. So that's the genotypic variation actually, which is the variation in terms of difference in number of chromosomes, structure of chromosomes, and so on. So basically, which prototype template or is going to be chosen? And now it's the environment. So environment and perception of the environment controls both actually. Which existing genes have to be activated, and what type of new genes have to be created. And this is the entire genetic engineering working in our lives. So we have genes whose function is to rewrite other genes, as we discussed. It is our perceptions which rewrite the genes. And if we do not have a higher body of knowledge, you know, if we do not have a perfect body of knowledge from where we can always derive perfect maps, or perfect pointers, so perfect pointers or absolute pointers, then in general perceptions are always going to rewrite in a negative fashion. Therefore, whenever rewriting takes place, mostly negative. But only when one has positive perceptions, and positive perceptions comes when we actually establish the supreme auspicious absolute Lord, and from that framework or from that from that framework, when we see reality, then only we can have positive perceptions. So then genes have programs for further growth, reproduction, and protection. That's what genes have. So what do these codes do? What do these codes talk about? So basically, they are sport programs actually, which dictate a certain kind of activity, which is for protection or defense and growth, production. Genes is. So and we can very well see therefore, we can very well see that different emotions or states of our heart are expressed as different enzymes, in our body. Huh? So, different enzymes, and that leads to different kind of so that leads to different kinds of behaviors as well. Different enzymes, create a different kind of behavior as well. So, so there are a number of mechanisms which make this happen actually. Like say for example, if a person is angry, like say for example, if a person is angry, what is happening is that it's the hypothalamus which gets activated, processes that okay, now the anger is there. Now he activates the pituitary, and the pituitary will take off blood from other areas and it will send a lot of blood to hands and legs. So when the blood is taken off from the brain, the intelligence is shared, the immune system is also shared, and there is a lot of energy which has come on hands and legs. So then what will one do? Because one has got a lot of energy in the hands and legs, Okay, so we saw that our body is like a camera. Our perceptions are like filters. Uh, the membrane is like the lens, which external stimuli to take in, not taken. The nucleus is like the database, which basically creates a complementary image copy of the proteins. So it does all the templates, and whatever you want, it instantiates. I mean, whatever is asked for or whatever signal is given is decoded, and a specific is generated actually generated is generated. So therefore what we have learned today is something very interesting and revolutionary, because what we are learning is that actually uh, spiritual life consists of simple activities. When we say, okay, hear the pastimes of the Lord, hear about the philosophy and principles of life, try to cultivate positive qualities, uh, meditation, chanting the holy names of God, uh, offering food to God. Just small and simple activities actually. But in these small and simple activities, wherein one of the most powerful and sublime algorithms which can bring about such a phenomenal change in our existence. Phenomenal change, because what is embedded in these simple activities is basically here we are seeing today's session. We saw what is embedded in these simple activities is basically genetic engineering, because absorption in spiritual life ensures positive thoughts, an inflow of positive thoughts, and a sufficient inflow of positive thoughts ensures an absorption in positive thoughts, and that is what will ensure the proper and sure and powerful control of the genes. In terms of the 27-30,000 genes which are existing, in terms of keeping the negative genes encapsulated always and in a deactivated state, and on the other hand, about the missing or the other genes actually be able to actually give signals for the creation of proper and positive genes which can ensure now health and vitality for a person, which can ensure health and vitality for a person. So in this way, a spiritual life even gives benefits on the bodily, the material, the health plane actually. So therefore, be the master of spiritual life, be the master of genetic engineering. Thank you. Hare Krishna. If you have any questions, you can type in. We can take questions. Uh, Okay, thank you all for your patient hearing. In today's